Okay, this is a video to show you a project I've been working on, which is a window. It's a double hung window. I'm planning on reusing this double hung window in an upcoming project where I'm replacing a door with a window. This window just happens to have the same width as the framing for the door as best I can measure. It looks very close, so I think it's going to be a good choice. This was an existing window in the house, which means it'll match the style of all of the existing windows. And of course, I won't have to buy a new window, and I won't have to worry about discarding this old window, having no use for it. This window had previously been replaced because of rot. And at the time, I thought the rot was, beyond what could be repaired. The issue with the rot was in the window sill and also in the window casings. The window casings are not on this window frame. There'd be a 3.5-inch piece of wood on this side, and on this side over here, and then 3.5 on the top. I'll have to replace those with new wood. Typically, it's very common for those casings to rot, especially on the end grain, either where it meets the windowsill, that's the number one spot, but also they can rot on the end grain at the top of the casing and then on the top piece of the casing. All of those end grains can be exposed to, and if the location has a lot of water and it doesn't get a chance to dry out, and the wood's not treated or painted, or the paint has failed, but even on the end grain, water, it's easy to get into the end grain. So in this case, the original windowsill, let me see if I got this in the right way. Okay, the original windowsill on this window is actually this piece of wood. Okay, and it was rotted all along its entire length. This would be difficult to, repair with two-part epoxy because it's so exposed, and over a very long length. Okay. Now, this type of a windowsill, I've heard that a practical way of repairing this windowsill is actually to cut it, let's just say in this case, along this line. Although you could cut it along any line, but this line is a convenient line. And then you can have, essentially, you could cut, even on just a table saw, a piece of wood of 1.5 inch. It has to have an angle on two sides, but that doesn't seem too hard. And then it would run the length, and then it would actually extend 3.5 inches for these little lapels, or whatever the right name for those are. Okay. And this piece of windowsill could actually be repaired that way. Now, it would need some two-part epoxy to patch up and restore these areas. Okay, and I could have done that with this windowsill if I wanted to restore it, but I opted not to do that. I instead opted to use a different piece for that. What I did use was a windowsill that I had actually taken out of another window. So the window that I took it out of was actually let me get this over here, was actually a double window. Okay. It was a double window in which this windowsill actually ran across both double windows like that. And that double window I replaced with a set of French doors. And I realized that if I cut this windowsill right here, then 1/2 of that windowsill I could use as a basis for this replacement windowsill. And since that window I was taking out anyway, I had no other use for that windowsill. Now that windowsill had already been patched because it had been repaired. It wasn't even the original windowsill, and it had been patched. but I still believe that it's going to be okay. Um, and the reason is because all the windowsills in this house have been patched now. And it won't be any worse off actually than any of the other windowsills in the house. And at some point in the future, all the windows in the house might be replaced. But for now, I'm making do with the windows I have. Now, I could have gone out and bought another 8-foot piece of windowsill stock for about $60. Used what I needed here, which is a little more than 3 feet. Now, I would have had to, cut that in various ways to shape it for what I needed. And I opted not to do that because of the fact that I don't need a new windowsill here, because all of the windowsills in the house have already been repaired. And this repair should be as good as all the other windows in the house, so that was the logic that I used. Now this windowsill repair is a little different than some of the under windowsill repairs because the window is already out of the house, the framing of the house, so I have access. And in this case, what I did was I actually removed, so I removed the old windowsill, and the old windowsill is, fastened in on the ends, with nails, these type of nails. So let me give you an example of what's going on there. So on the end of there were 3 of these nails that would be pinning in and going into the windowsill. So these nails, you can't just pull these out rather straightforwardly. What you have to do is drill a hole on the top and the bottom of the flat side so that you can get in a pair of pliers, needle nose pliers, on both sides, and then they generally can be pulled out. And then once they're pulled out, the windowsill will come out. Now, I've replaced that nail with a screw. I like to replace things with screws because as I'm reassembling it, I can take it apart again if I make a mistake or an adjustment. So I don't like to use the nails unless I have to, or I'm 100% sure, or for whatever reason. But in this case, I went ahead with a screw. I put a washer on it because that hole was kind of dug out. Now, the important thing here is this is really just to hold this unit together until it gets installed in the frame. The weight of the windowsill actually bears on this piece of wood. And this screw is just to hold this thing in this way so it doesn't pop out. Once it's in the framing of the house, of course, that screw honestly won't really do anything. It will keep it from moving this way or that way, but it's also going to be constrained by many, many other pieces. So that's not terribly important once it's in the frame. Now, I could reinforce this by adding more screws, which I could do, but right now I'm just putting this together. Now on the other side, the situation was a little bit more interesting because, as is often the case, that entire lower portion of the side of the window was actually broken off, or rotted out, you might say. So in this case, what I did was I screwed the windowsill down into that stock. Then I fashioned a shim out of a small piece of cedar that I had left as a cutoff. And I cut it to the angle that would be needed so that when this is installed in the window frame, this would sit on the framing component that might be called the sill also. I forget what the term for that is in the framing, And when replacing a windowsill, for example, when you replace an entire windowsill in a window that's in a house, very often you end up cutting the windowsill and then pulling the portions out, which very often will damage this piece here, very often breaking it off. And then when the new windowsill is put in place, it needs support from underneath. Like I remember seeing this old house video where after putting in the new windowsill, the contractor, I forget his name, the good guy. Okay, he injects spray foam, expanding spray foam under it, actually. So as he then slides it in place, it's pushing up on it from the framing member, which is here. So anyway, that's just a minor point. When I put this in, I can put shims if necessary. I could add more of these. This will be easy to support from underneath because of the framing, the 2x4 framing that's going to be right there. Okay. Now, I will say that this stock that you get from the store as a replacement sill didn't exactly match the profile of the original windowsill. It was close. It was close. There were some areas where the dimensions weren't quite exactly the same. It had the same overall thickness, the width, the angle was the same. This little component there, that rabbet, was not the same. So what I did was I used a router. This is where the drywall is going to come in. And my concern was on the original one that maybe it wasn't really deep enough for the drywall. I wouldn't know that for sure until I actually assembled it all. But because this is completely invisible in the final construction, what I did was I took a router and I just routed this out. I did not do a very neat job, but the thing is I don't need to because that's not exposed, okay? I just wanted to open that up. Okay, now on this particular job, these strips here, okay, I don't know exactly what the name of this component is, but this forms what's known as the blind stop. The casing attaches here. This is where the storm window would go in on the Western style window casing. Okay, very often the end grain of this piece, this trim piece, whatever it's called, I'll call it the blind stop, that's cut at the same angle as the windowsill. And that end grain very often will rot. So this piece here very often rots. And I've replaced sections of these pieces on several windows as a part of a repair. When I do a patch, I might need a piece of this, which I can try patching it, but very often I have a piece of that I can actually replace. And the reason is because if you have a window that you've taken out, you're not using again, you can just take this piece off and then use it on other repairs, okay? Now, on this particular case, I should have primed that before I reassembled it, but I actually assembled these pieces and then I primed it afterward. And I had a little trouble getting the paint right in on that end grain, but I think it's going to be okay. It would have been easier if I had primed it. And the reason is because that edge was cut, exposed, not primed when I put this back together, okay? So I think I got enough primer in that crack. I tried opening up that crack a little bit by loosening my screws and getting it in. I think it's going to be fine. Okay, let me just hit pause and I'll turn the window upside down. Okay, here's the window. It's actually right side up, but I had it upside down before. Here's the window as viewed from the outside with this replacement windowsill in place. Now, one thing that you notice here is that in this place here where the trim piece would go, you can actually see there's actually a residual two-part epoxy. Now, the reason for this is that very frequently in a repair, recently what I've taken to doing, is that when I see that a trim piece needs some type of repair due to possibly some rot at the bottom, or sometimes if it looks like it's just starting to get a little bit punky, what I do is with a saw, I cut off the bottom 1/8 or maybe 1/8 of an inch of that piece. Then I treat it with wood hardener. Then after it's all done, I fill that in with two-part epoxy. Now, I do that at the same time that I'm doing a two-part epoxy repair to the windowsill component. This is all two-part epoxy, and it's all one piece, because now the casing is off, but that epoxy remains. because it was really a separate piece. The other part was the wood. This is the epoxy wood boundary. Now, I just left that on there because when I put the new window casing on, I'm just going to keep that same little lip because it's like a little porch, and the end grain of the window casing is not actually sitting on the windowsill. It's actually 1/8 of an inch higher up. So it may not be as constantly wet. It may not really matter, but I that's how I ended up with those, and I'm just leaving them there. Okay, now I'll turn the window around. Okay, here's the window as viewed from the inside. This, I believe, was a Caradco window from 1980. And one thing about the replacement windowsill that you get at you can get at Home Depot is that strip. Okay, this weather strip fits into a very small channel, which is not present in the stock. I did hit that with a router, and it's just to give you a tighter seal here. Minor point, but I just thought I'd show that. So that's basically it. I might show this later when I install this window, just to see how this project turns out. Okay, it does need a little repairing here. I'm not sure how that happened. I'm not sure if this final window is going to be painted, probably, or stained. I'm not sure. We'll see how that turns out. Thanks.